colleagues, moving on to the core subject, we are going through very specific times from the point of view of the head of the political cabinet. Even though we are here in this royal castle, there is no monarchy in Poland, as we know, but there's been a lot of turmoil, and there will be in the weeks ahead before the elections. But we know what will happen to politicians, to us as electors. We are now concentrated on all the tactical debates, political debates, but let's get back to strategy for a moment. The strategic perspective has to be concentrated on the most important thing, which is education. We will touch upon also, and we've been discussing since this morning, the classical or Christian education as qualified by Mr. Konieczny. But I will be discussing not a strategy which is only on paper, but I would like to present you a couple of examples and actions, measures regarding classical education that we have achieved to implement. This kind of list started the second Congress, and the introduction by Mr. Górecki concerned the same things that I will be mentioning now, but I will be maybe repeating myself, plus I will add some new initiatives that we've achieved to implement. So to begin, well, what is the most important about a good strategy is not the activity and action, but it's the objective of the strategy. From September 2020, when you didn't know at that moment that Przemysław Czarnek would become the Minister of Education. And just before that, the minister, together with his experts, set some rules. And among those rules, one of the key goals of the Ministry of Education and Science was, and the goal of this minister was, to ensure the upbringing of national elites. And what will facilitate this is opening ourselves to classical education. When talking about classical education, I wanted to argue a bit with Professor Ptaszek and his experts. How come that we are now at the Classical Education Congress and we have a concert of revolutionary etude? This is a piece which accompanied this Congress, but Mr. Kucharczyk made it hard for me to react because he showed us how romantic heritage was important to us. But let's get back to music. I will be talking about my impressions. Maybe you can share the same impressions that I had. Of course, I was really amazed by what I could hear, Bach, Mozart, but I was particularly struck by Chopin's music because this reflects Polish nature. Professor Krompiec, Father Krompiec, described this nature as partly emotional and reasonable, based on reason, and this is part of our work on culture in this part of Europe. It had an impact on the social culture too, so it will be something which will justify the fact that in public life we will discuss virtues, female and masculine virtues, artes liberales, and so on, which doesn't mean that in a daily routine in our ministry those things are not important. Getting back to our thesis, when talking about upbringing education of elites, it would be worth really defining who is an elite. This is maybe someone who is an authority in his field. So who is an authority then? Then I will like to quote Professor Henryk Kiereś, who explain it in the most synthetic way. An authority has a justified and verified knowledge, and undoubtedly testifies for its relevance, and those are good deeds from the moral point of view, even in exchange for the loss of a good or one's life. So let's get back to the truth from the quotation by Cardinal Wyszyński, which was brought forward by the first speaker. National elites, of course, there are different aspects of social life and elites. What will bring them together is having authorities, or an authority which is linked to a human being, and by that also to God and human culture. Well, now let's move on from the field of education, as you understand it here in this room, which means school education, high school education, primary school education, and so on. And let's move on to something that may be not nice to teacher, but this is a quotation of Felix Koneczny. He said that education is a diluted science. So this means that its role is to refer what is happening at the level of science with regard to classical education at all levels of schooling. So here I would like to really thank God and people who are behind it, because it is with great satisfaction that I must say that as regards understanding the human being, we can be satisfied for the last 2 years is what is now ongoing is translating into English the philosophical encyclopedia, which is one of the greatest achievements of the last years. Maybe you may not know that Przemysław Czarnek, as the head of Lubelskie Voivodeship, was intervening many times with the Prime Minister Gowin in order to translate it, but now, thanks to the fact that he's the Minister of Education, it's possible. We will achieve this goal. I would like to thank Opera Omnia and the translation of Thomas Aquinas. So all the pieces of this great philosopher will be translated. It's great. What is a novelty, we are now working on that, is the Classical Ethics Dictionary, a very helpful handbook, not only to achieve tasks that we are already carrying out, but also in order to, as you know, because we intend to put a greater emphasis on ethical education, because there are many temptations for young people. So we want to drop this religious teaching during religious classes. As regards the understanding of God, theology, it is with great satisfaction that we can really boast the organization of our conference, which is organized by our academia. It was organized on the occasion of an anniversary of, namely, Fides et Ratio, this also Evangelium Vitae encyclical, both encyclicals. It's an anniversary of those encyclicals, so it's a good occasion and opportunity to make a synthesis of what was done by John Paul II. The research on the role of John Paul II and of the pontificate as such in science. So we will dedicate a special grant measure to this activity, to this kind of research. When looking at humanities as such, we can notice with satisfaction that international science will have direct access to the best synthesis of Polish history written by Andrzej Nowak, as experts say. It is now being printed out in German, and also the English version will be soon available, because it's very important from the point of view of understanding our culture, especially as concerns its golden ages. We need to understand it in the context of Christianitas. The reason for satisfaction is also the changes that took place in already existing institutions. For example, Zamojska Academy, which is teaching pedagogues and wants to develop programs, pedagogical programs. We know that we need this kind of scientific centers which will allow us to prepare us for implementing classical education. Another institution which has done a great effort in all that recently, and not only recently, is the Educational Research Institute. There is a chair dedicated to upbringing, and there is also a whole publication series which is now being prepared about upbringing. And another thing which is important from the classical model of education, not a lot has happened, not enough has happened recently in this field, but we are preparing the national philology with our partners because it's a great challenge. We want Polish studies to be part of the process of strengthening classical educational models. We know that it's not present in universities. So some measures, some institutions, we are very grateful to God, to all those people. It's really impossible to list all people who are involved in that, but please, if I may, I would like to mention two groups which are involved in all this process because it lasted 3 years, so we are very grateful for that. And it's about the Christianitas Association with Artur Górecki, who is the greatest ambassador of classical education within the Ministry of Education and Science, because he's an expert in this field and he's very determined to be involved in all those aspects. And the second group is the realistic philosophy group, which is rooted in the University of Lublin, and now they are present all over the country. And here I would like to thank Professor Paweł Skrzydlewski. He used to work within the ministry, and now he's director of Zamojska Academy. And he's a great friend of ours.
However, what we can do at schools to develop this classical education, there is a series of activities that I already mentioned when I was greeting you on behalf of the Minister Czarnek, is to protect the integrity of Polish culture in Polish schools without excluding religion from the view of civilization and culture. You know that sometimes there is a very big secular pressure on us, on teachers, to avoid and omit the topic of God. However, the approach of our minister has been quite consistent. Support for Catholic education, multiple funds to finance Catholic schools is a very clear message and an important support for those centers, and to protect Christian and Catholic culture. Development of classical education is also the development of teachers. So I'm thinking of ethics courses for teachers that are being imparted in many academia at a very high level, using the heritage of ethics, classical ethics and philosophy. We also want to improve Latin teachers by providing courses and also meetings related to the cultural canon, using the potential of the Center for Educational Development, which we thank them for. There have been also some formal changes that facilitate classical education. For a couple of weeks now, we have the possibility to provide Latin classes in primary schools, in high schools as well. Dr. Górecki informed us about the state strategy for teachers' development. Teacher development centers have been talking a lot about classical education. We have also strived to introduce a certain language, a vocabulary, to be able to read through realism, through classical ways of thinking. So the category of truth, goodness and beauty, and also nobility, to be noble. So that was something suspicious at first, but luckily it remained. This word was kind of reason of hot virtue, of hot topic around Poland, virtues particularly. So a human being who is whole should have a wholeness of virtues, morality, and also intellectual virtues. A small change, but also a meaningful one, is that we have introduced a new text to be discussed at schools. And in particular, this is the book, which is a philosophy manual by Professor Dłubacz, A History of Philosophy. For a couple of days, it's been available in bookshops, and we will make it available to Polish schools, because about 1,000 of Polish schools or even more teach philosophy. So if philosophy is a subject at a school, they should have this manual available. Another educational aid for teaching philosophy, mentioned by Professor Mamcarz-Plisiecki, which he mentioned as an element of classical education, is a set of didactic materials, a coherent manual to teach philosophy in high schools. And what I'm referring to, they are materials edited by a team managed by Professor Artur Mamcarz-Plisiecki, which is also available online. We also have a competition. It's the Philosophical Olympics competition, which is being continued and will be continued in the future. So I think that this is a very attractive manner of teaching. Classes are not enough, and it's not always the best possible way to transfer knowledge. So a competition is a great way to popularize those topics among the youngest generation. I've mentioned classical education, but also upbringing as a separate topic. So I continue indicating the great work done by the Wychowujmy monthly journal, not just in narrow topics of aretology, but also classical inspirations cause the creation of a lot more content. There have already been 12 editions of the Wychowujmy monthly journal, and it's targeted at teachers, pedagogues, and also parents and grandparents. During the Congress, we have mentioned some personal examples to follow, which are an expression of the classical canon in our Polish culture as part of European culture. We mentioned Cardinal Wyszyński, we mentioned Pope John Paul II. We know that we've been mobilized recently, to present the silhouette of John Paul II in a way that would be more realistic. Also, Jacek Woroniecki is a figure that will be used to popularize classical education and to popularize this author, pedagogue, and an important person for the Polish Church, because he was also a servant of God. So I would like to encourage you to discuss this, whether it wouldn't be good to go back to two topics that we considered in the Ministry of Education. Firstly, changing or rewriting the curriculum, especially in terms of human studies, philosophy, ethics, to read them in a way that would be in line with classical heritage. A formal change of the legal framework would be too much, and probably it wouldn't be understood by the users of the education system. However, we could draft a text that would explain Polish education in the past and in the future, possible future. That would be a very interesting initiative, and I hope that the minister would finance such a project, which would benefit us all intellectually. And secondly, after the Congress or in the breaks, we could discuss solutions, possible solutions, formal and legal solutions that would open the organizational frameworks for schools and classical divisions in our educational system. We know topics such as sports. There are sports classes in schools that are dedicated to sports. So maybe we could create some elitarian classes that would not be like obligatory for everybody, or would not be in every school, but would be an option, a possibility for those who are interested in it, and that would also allow them to get some support to carry out this task. I encourage you to follow what the Ministry of Education is doing. We want to support you with our resources, both administration and financial resources. So ethics theorians say that there are arguments we should defend against the arguments of the opponents. There hasn't been a lot of opposition or conflict. However, there is a journalist from the TV channel that I sometimes invite. I don't see her today. There was a dispute with Minister Czarnek about immigration policy and the consequences of decisions in the countries of Western Europe, and also the consequences of our approach in Poland and the approach of Polish government. The journalists couldn't find arguments to counteract what the minister was saying, so she evoked an authority of her grandfather who taught classical languages in Zamość. So I invited her to the Congress. But about arguments in a dispute, coming back to this topic, if we don't stand stand up for the truth and defend the truth also in the media, we can be sure that our calm, tranquil Polish reality will be subverted by barbarians. Whether there are barbarians who are well organized and they can destroy the castle, the royal castle in Warsaw, ruin it, or maybe barbarians who attack teenage girls or not allow them to get to school in some countries of Western Europe. Thank you so much.